The coming and the presence of the English had deprived us of life and liberty. Their ways were not our ways. Their interests and their purposes meant our destruction. We must turn back again at the wheels of that infamous machine which was destroying us. We must get the English out of Ireland. Our efforts at first were naturally timid, and they were often futile because we were too much concerned with the political side, confused in this by the example of England, where nationality was always expressed that way and was principally a matter of political organisation. Repeal of the Union was little more than a cry, gaining what real strength it had from the more vigorous hostility of the Young Ireland movement, which revived our old literature, which recovered Irish history and spread a new spirit. That spirit was not wholly martial, but what Irishman will say today that it was not beneficial even so. The Fenians came and once and for all raised the banner of Ireland's freedom, with a definite military policy which, though unsuccessful at the time, had its full effect in bringing before men's minds the real road to Irish salvation. The Fenian idea left a torch behind it, with which Tom Clark and Sean McDermott kindled the fires of Easter week, and though seemingly quenched, these were soon blazing brightly again at Solohead, at Clonfin, at Macroom, at Dublin, at many a place in Clare and Mayo and Monaghan and Donegal during the recent struggle. After the Fenians, years of death again while famine raged over the land, till Parnell emerged to struggle for independence under the name of Home Rule, which, though accompanied by the social and economic revolt of David's national land policy, was bringing us back again to the dangerous idea of seeking freedom by means of some form of political weapon. The weakness inherent in Parnell's policy was obviated by his intense personal hostility to the English. He never forgot the end in the means. But it lost that saving protection when it fell into the hands of those who succeeded him and who, in the lotus-like atmosphere of Westminster Parliament, forgot the national spirit and lost touch with the minds and feelings of their countrymen. We would have an identical situation today had we chosen the same methods and fought on the same battlefield for the last 5 years. In that parliamentary period, however, the people at home were growing in national consciousness and in strength and courage. The Gaelic revival and the learning of our national tongue were teaching a new national self-respect. We recalled the immortal tales of our ancient heroes, and we began to look to a future in which we could have a proud, free, distinct nation worthy of the past. We learned that what we wanted was not a political form of Home Rule, or any other kind or form of Home Rule, but a revival of Gaelic life and ways. Economic thought and study showed us that the poverty which afflicted us came from the presence of the English and their control over us, had come from the landlordism and the drain of English taxation, the neglect of Irish resources, and the obstruction to Irish industries by the domination of the English Parliament, and we saw that we must manage these things for ourselves. And besides the hope of material emancipation, we grew to think of love of our land, and all that it had given us, and had still to give us, and what we could make of it when it was our own once more. And we became filled with a patriotic fervour before which, when the time came, force would prove impotent. The expression of this new hope and new courage manifested itself in the Easter week rising. The leaven of the old Fenianism had been at work in our midst. Tom Clark, a member of the old Fenian Brotherhood, came out from jail after 16 years' penal servitude to take up the work where he had left it off. Sean McDermott, tramping through Ireland, preaching the Fenian gospel of a freedom which must be fought for, enrolled recruits, and by his pure patriotism and lovable unselfish character, inspired all with whom he came in contact to emulate him and to be worthy of his teaching. Our army was in existence again. It was not brought into being, as is wrongfully supposed, by the example of Carson's recruiting in northeast Ulster. It needed no such example. It was already in being, the old Irish Republican Brotherhood in fuller force. But England's manufactured resistance in the northeast enabled our soldiers to come out into the open with the advantage in 1916 of a rising starting unexpectedly from the streets instead of from underground. England was unable or unwilling to interfere with her own Orange instruments, and she did not dare, therefore, to suppress ours. Armed resistance was the indispensable factor in our struggle for freedom. It was never possible for us to be military strong, but we could be strong enough to make England uncomfortable, and strong enough to make England too uncomfortable. While she explains the futility of force by others, it is the only argument she listens to. For ourselves it had that practical advantage, but it was above all other things the expression of our separate nationhood. Unless we were willing to fight for our nation, even without any certainty of success, we acquiesced in the doctrine of our national identity with England. It embodied too for us the spirit of sacrifice, the maintenance of the ideal, the courage to die for it, so that military efforts were made in nearly every generation. It was a protest too against our Anglicization and demoralization, a challenge of spirit against material power, and as such bore fruit. The rising of 1916 was the fruit. It appeared at the time of the surrender to have failed, and that valiant effort and the martyrdoms which followed it finally awoke the sleeping spirit of Ireland. It carried into the hearts of the people the flame which had been burning in those who had the vision to see the pit into which we were sinking deeper and deeper, and who believed that a conflagration was necessary to reveal to the countrymen the road to national death upon which we were blindly treading. The banner of Ireland's freedom had been raised and was carried forward. During the rising, the leaders of Easter week declared a republic, but not as a fact. We knew it was not a fact. It was a wonderful gesture, throwing down the gauntlet of defiance to the enemy, expressing to ourselves the complete freedom we aimed at, and for that reason was an inspiration to us. If the impossible had happened, and the rising had succeeded, and the English had surrendered and evacuated the country, we would then have been free, and we could then have adopted the republican form of government, or any other form we wished. But the rising did not succeed as a military venture, and if it had succeeded, it would have been the surrender and the evacuation which would have been the proof of our success, not the name for, nor the form of, the government we would have chosen. If we had still a descendant of our Irish kings left, we would be as free, under a limited monarchy with the British gone, as under a republic. The form of our government is our domestic concern. It does not affect the fact of our national freedom. Our national freedom depends upon the extent to which we reverse the history of the last 700 years, the extent to which we get rid of the enemy and get rid of his control over our material and spiritual life.